Welcome back to the Truth to Power podcast. I'm your host, Danger Varoz. We have a very special guest with us today on this episode. I'm talking with Jesse George, who is the New Orleans Policy Director at the Alliance for Affordable Energy. Thank you for joining us today, Jesse.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
So the reason that we have you on the show today is to discuss an issue that's happening in New Mexico that mirrors very closely something that you've recently gone through in Louisiana, and that is I guess, so to speak, the takeover of your public utilities in the state of Louisiana and in the city of New Orleans by BCP, or Bernhard Capital Partners. You've kind of been in the trenches with BCP for a while now, but I think there's a big difference between there are some differences between what you're experiencing in Louisiana and New Mexico. For example, New Mexico, our gas company, or that Bernhard Capital Partners is attempting to take over, would like to purchase, is a state, or nearly a statewide monopoly, whereas Louisiana is more parceled than that. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, here in New Orleans, we are in a somewhat unique position in that our city council has regulatory authority over our investor-owned utilities. So we have one, or have had one, provider of electric and gas services here in Orleans Parish. But in the rest of the state, which is regulated by the Louisiana Public Service Commission, there are a variety of investor-owned utilities and co-ops and other utilities providing service.
So that's kind of cool that you have of more of a variety than New Mexico has, because New Mexicans, if you want gas, you got to pay one person, and BCP wants to be that person. So what has your experience been with Bernhard Capital? Who is BCP and who runs it? And what is your experience with them so far?
So Bernhard Capital Partners is a private equity firm headed up by a guy named Jim Bernhard, who is a longtime player in Louisiana politics. He is a major donor of our state Democratic Party, and wields a tremendous amount of influence in the state as a result. In December of 2023, Bernhard, doing business as a newly formed utility called Delta States Utilities at the time. I think they've since changed that again to Delta Utilities. But they filed a joint application along with Entergy New Orleans, which had been our electric and gas provider for many decades now, to acquire Entergy's retail gas distribution system. This is at a time, when our city is attempting to phase out fossil fuels. We have a climate action plan that our mayor's office developed, which calls for, being carbon free by 2050. For us, it was somewhat befuddling to create a new utility whose sole business model is selling fossil gas.
Right. So how does BCP and Delta and all that, what is their plan for going along with the mayor's transition, or is there a plan?
Well, I mean, for their part, they've argued that natural gas is a clean fuel, and that it, as we've been hearing for well over a decade now, that it's a bridge fuel to the future, to renewables, when in reality, they have every intention of keeping us dependent on fossil fuels for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. And my understanding is that most of natural gas, which is actually just methane, a substantial portion of it is a byproduct of fracking, and so it's really not it's not a renewable energy at all. It's absolutely every bit as fossil fueled as oil is. We actually, anecdotally, we had a piece of legislation that was attempted to go through our state legislature this year, which sole purpose was to just make sure everyone knew that natural gas is renewable. It's like, hey, it's renewable, okay? It's renewable. And like, why would they have to do that if we didn't already know better? So um, that doesn't sound like a good situation at all. It doesn't sound like the mayor is going to be able to meet a lot of the goals of transitioning if this is the case. Um, does is it true that Bernhard Capital has acquired multiple utilities in the state of Louisiana? My understanding is that one of them is a more of a statewide or a larger um, company, and the other one is focused on New Orleans, the city itself.
Yeah, so Entergy New Orleans, our utility here in Orleans Parish, is a operating company of Entergy Corporation, which has several sister companies, including Entergy Louisiana, which serves a large portion of Louisiana outside of New Orleans. And so Bernhard attempted and was successful in acquiring Entergy Louisiana's gas distribution system as well. That required approval from our Public Service Commission. They also acquired gas distribution systems from CenterPoint Energy here in Louisiana and in Mississippi. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that they're also attempting some acquisitions in Texas as well.
So they definitely have their eyes on the ball. This utility distribution, and uh, my understanding is they really don't have any experience with running these kinds of companies prior to their acquisitions, these recent acquisitions. Um,
No, Bernhard has had some experience providing energy as a service for particular clients. For instance, here in New Orleans, they had an energy services contract with Tulane University to provide energy on Tulane's campus after Tulane grew dissatisfied with the service that they were being provided by Entergy. But they have never operated as a public utility serving, the number of ratepayers that they will be serving, under these deals now that they have successfully closed. In fact, Delta as a utility was only incorporated about a month or so before the application was filed for this acquisition.
wow. You said something interesting there. You said serving uh, ratepayers, which is, I think, something I'll flag and look back to later. Tell me about the process of BCP acquiring um, these local utilities. Was it all, you know, above the board, or were there any problems during the process? Because my understanding, the public service board for the state is similar to what New Mexico has in our PRC, our Public Regulation Commission. But then there was also approval required from the city council in New Orleans for the other acquisition. What was that process like? Was everything above board there?
Yeah, so I was engaged primarily here at the city level as New Orleans policy director for the Alliance. And I would say there was an unusual and alarming level of secrecy around this process and around this transaction. Our city council has a standing protective order for utility dockets that allows utilities to designate certain discovery materials as proprietary and confidential. And what that typically means is that formal interveners to the docket are required to sign a confidentiality agreement, saying that they won't disclose the contents of the documents, et cetera. And once you sign that confidentiality agreement, then you're entitled to receive those documents that are produced under this, what we call HSPM designation, highly sensitive protected materials. But in this proceeding pertaining to this gas sale transaction, Bernhard Capital, Delta Utilities, took it upon itself to create an entirely new designation for protected materials that they called HSPM-CS, or highly sensitive protected materials dash commercially sensitive. And these documents they provided only to the city council's utility advisors and to no other parties in the proceeding. They did offer in-camera review, in-person review of those documents, but they would not provide us with electronic copies. When we made a very reasonable request to allow our expert in the case, who lives in Denver, Colorado, to view those documents in person in the offices of our city council's technical advisors, who are also located in Denver, Bernhard objected to that request and insisted that our expert fly to New Orleans to view the documents in their offices, which of course adds great expense to the proceeding. We're a small organization. We have to allocate our, resources, in a conservative way. So, they did everything in their power to make sure that we had limited access to information about this transaction.
Fascinating. And for our viewers that aren't familiar, in camera means, yeah, like he said, you have to fly to New Orleans to go into a special room, and you can only look at the documents there, and you can't take pictures of it, and you can't, like the walls are lined with lead, so Superman can't see inside.
Exactly. And again, these documents were being held. They had been provided to the city council's utility advisors, who are located in the same city as our expert witness. But even viewing them in that location, the company deemed unacceptable. And unfortunately, we filed a motion to compel production of these documents, or at least to allow, our expert to view them in this, in this way that we had requested. Unfortunately, the hearing officer who was appointed to the case denied our motion. And so, we were never allowed real access to those documents.
Wow. So what do you think is justification for this level of secrecy? Um, is it just to make you jump through extra hoops and discourage you and make your life harder? Or do you think that there's any legitimacy to this level of secrecy?
I think it is to make us jump through hoops, partially. I think it also was due to the fact that these documents in particular pertain to their capital expansion plans, something that we had pointed to, that they had alluded to in their filings, but were, spelled out in much greater detail in these documents, which of course will lead to inevitable rate increases for ratepayers, which is one of the major concerns that we had with this transaction. We know that Bernhard/Delta is not just planning to maintain the existing gas distribution system as is. They are looking to invest in the system, and to expand it beyond, its current infrastructure. And so that means, we know that all of these capital costs get passed through directly to ratepayers. And in New Orleans, that is a shrinking pool of ratepayers, because one of our city's largest retail gas customers is our Sewage and Water Board, which for a long time has relied on its own turbines, which are gas fired, to provide pumping power for to get all the water out of the bowl that is New Orleans when it rains. We just had a really strong squall come through this morning, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So our Sewage and Water Board is actually building its own substation along with Entergy New Orleans to switch from that gas-fired power to direct electrical service for those pumps. And that means that a huge portion of the retail gas load of the city is going to evaporate almost overnight. Along with the general trend of electrification, that we see happening in people's homes and businesses as folks move away from using gas in their homes and businesses, that means a shrinking pool of ratepayers, mostly people who are renters and don't have the authority to electrify their homes, or people who just don't have the upfront capital costs to do so, low-income people in particular. These are the people who are going to be left behind on this retail gas system that Bernhard is going to be pumping a lot of money into, and expecting these ratepayers to shoulder that burden.
Right, because anyone who's familiar with the way these utilities work, especially when they're investor owned, is that they make their money through these large capital expenditures. They don't make a lot of money from the regular return on investment of just selling gas. They make all their money from spending a ton of money and then rewarding their ratepayers. And so you're saying that the low income people who are locked into their their energy plans are going to be left to foot the bill for this.
That's exactly right. And that is a great point. I think that's a really common misconception that people have about utilities is that, electric or gas utilities make their money on sales, and they absolutely do not. They make their money by building things and spending money. And ultimately, that means spending ratepayer money because all of that cost gets passed right through to ratepayers with a premium, of course.
I thought it was interesting. A lot of folks at home here in New Mexico might not realize that the application that BCP filled out in order to acquire New Mexico Gas Company didn't make a whole lot of a mention about what sort of a benefit this would be to our ratepayers. And in the instance, in this special circumstance of a state-sanctioned monopoly, they are somewhat legally required to demonstrate a benefit to the public in some way. And it doesn't seem like BCP considered that. It doesn't seem like that's terribly important to them. Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to spend this money, and ooh, that's secret, don't look at that. And then when you ask them, well, how do the ratepayers benefit? There's really kind of nothing to say about it. I know that the acquisition is fairly recent, but have you seen any sort of benefit to the public from this transition?
No, I mean the transaction closes, I believe, next month in June, and I believe Delta is supposed to, Bernhard is supposed to begin service in July or later this summer. But in the application process and in the proceeding that leading up to the approval, they were pointing to, sort of nebulous economic benefits, which, Entergy, for its part, has done the same. They've used the same playbook for years. Entergy is Louisiana's only Fortune 500 company. It's headquartered here in New Orleans, and they use that fact, sort of as a cudgel to, stamp down any criticism of their operations. And Delta slash Bernhard is sort of attempting to use the same play by saying, well, we're going to build our headquarters here. We're going to create 100 new jobs. Of course, none of these things are a condition of the sale. So if these new jobs never materialize, that's no sweat off their back. They've already gotten what they wanted. Meanwhile, as I was sort of alluding to, the only way that they can make money out of this deal is by squeezing it out of, a shrinking pool of captive ratepayers. It's the only way that a deal like this makes sense in a climate, like I said, when we know that electrification is coming, and that selling retail gas is ultimately a dying business. So the only way that this makes financial sense is if you know that you can squeeze these costs out of these captive ratepayers that have no choice but to pay them.
And so, since this is their plan to squeeze costs out of ratepayers through capital expenditures, I suppose that would be the reason for the overclassification of documents and the transparency issues.
I would think so, yes.
Um, what other kind of issues have you faced with this acquisition other than a lack of transparency and a lack of experience, I should say? Those are the two big ones. Um, was there anything fishy going on with the approval of the statewide approval board or with the city council in New Orleans as far as, I don't know, campaign donations or anything like that? Like,
Well, I'll say right off the bat, unfortunately, we were not able to engage in the proceeding that took place before the Louisiana Public Service Commission pertaining to Entergy Louisiana's gas system. And ultimately, the commission staff filed no discovery requests of the parties, and recommended the approval of the sale basically with no conditions.
wow.
And because there was no record of opposition, our commission ultimately voted unanimously to approve the sale. And that really hurt us here in New Orleans because not only our city council, but our sewage and water board, which intervened in the proceeding, pointed to that approval by the Louisiana Public Service Commission as a reason why the city council should follow suit. We, of course, urge the city council to exercise its independent regulatory authority to not make the same mistake that the commission had made, but ultimately they decided to follow along. But thanks to some, investigative journalism by folks at the Louisiana Illuminator, it was uncovered that Bernhard and its associates had made campaign contributions of about $200,000 to the 5 public service commissioners over a period of years. I forget what the exact time frame was. But as I mentioned sort of at the top of the call or at the top of the conversation, Bernhard and, Jim Bernhard in particular has been a major player in Louisiana politics for a long time. So it's really not surprising that he has made these kind of campaign contributions to our public service commissioners. And I would not be surprised to find his name on the donor rolls for our city council members here in New Orleans as well.
So he's really using a lot of that political capital that he's possibly already established, as well as additional donations to make this super smooth process work. It sounds like there wasn't a lot of resistance.
That's correct. And, up until a couple of years ago, it was perfectly legal here in New Orleans for city council members and candidates to receive campaign contributions from regulated utilities. Thanks to the advocacy of the Alliance for Affordable Energy and our partners in the Energy Future New Orleans Coalition, we were able to get an ordinance passed a couple of years ago banning those campaign contributions from regulated utilities. But of course, up until the point when this deal was approved, Bernhard was not a regulated utility and so was free to make, any contributions they chose to make.
Wow.
And there is no such law, pertaining to the Louisiana Public Service Commission. They are perfectly free to take donations from regulated utilities and do so happily.
Wow. As your regulation commission, is that an elected body or an appointed body?
They are an elected body, although I'll say that there's actually currently a bill in the Louisiana legislature in the current session to amend our state constitution to include 2 appointed positions to the Public Service Commission, something that we are opposing. But currently it is a 5-member elected body.
Well, good luck with that fight, because we have recently transitioned to a 3-member fully appointed by the governor body, and it is not going great. Let me ask you about the customers and the ratepayers, and because I know in our state it is required for BCP to demonstrate a benefit to the public, as this is a statewide regulated monopoly. But since Louisiana is a bit more parceled, is there any sort of expectation to benefit the public in these sort of deals? And has BCP attempted to demonstrate a desire to do that, other than or is it just these, as you call them, these nebulous sort of ideas that that they put forward?
Yeah, so here in New Orleans, at least, we have, our city council way back in 2006 passed a resolution that lays out 18 factors that the council must consider in approving deals of this kind. Among other things, it requires a showing of the applicants that the deal will produce both short and long-term benefits for ratepayers. And we argued, of course, that the applicants met neither of those requirements, that they were not able to successfully prove either short or long-term benefits to ratepayers. They pointed, in addition to these sort of nebulous economic benefits that I talked about before, they also pointed to, some IT improvements that they're planning to make that supposedly is going to improve customer service. But really, that is it.
The core of the benefit that they're bringing is just this idea that, oh, a headquarters and having this all here, and don't you love it? Don't you want it? You can have a coffee shop across the street. And then,
And having more customer service automation, I guess, which to me as a ratepayer, doesn't sound like an improvement. But
no, no, not at all. We're currently hearing, especially when you're talking about these captive low income ratepayers. It kind of reminds me on the national scale about what's going on with Social Security, with the push to automate so much will leave so many elderly people and disabled people behind, who are unable to negotiate with an automated system and need to have some more in person, need to have someone on the phone with them, need to have something real. And so taking that
absolutely.
away is a real detriment.
Absolutely. And of course, the overarching concern of this whole proceeding again is the climate impact. And of course, New Orleans is a city that is, especially vulnerable to climate change. We have already experienced, the effects of it in a very firsthand way. And so the climate concerns that we raised about this deal, the fact that you're creating a utility whose sole business is selling fossil gas to be burned directly in people's homes and businesses. A couple of different witnesses for Bernhard offered almost verbatim testimony. One of them was Jeffrey Yuknes, one of the partners with Bernhard. Another was David Dismukes, who is the head of Louisiana State University's Energy Center. They both said that while climate change is an important public policy consideration, it has no bearing on whether this particular deal is in the public interest. And I found that to be really confounding.
Wow.
And again, this testimony appears almost verbatim in both of these witnesses' testimony.
We're expecting a lot of similar tomfoolery as BCP poisons itself to acquire New Mexico Gas Company. So your experience with this is invaluable. I appreciate you sharing it with us. Now, at the Alliance for Affordable Energy, what else have you been working on, energy adjacent? Of course, it's all energy adjacent. It's the Affordable Energy Alliance. But what else do you busy yourself with?
We're working, we have a citywide energy efficiency program here in New Orleans that we're working with our city council to improve. We're working on the development of a distributed energy resources program to provide upfront incentives for people to install battery storage systems on their homes to create real sort of behind the meter resilience for people. We're working to improve our community solar rules, which were adopted in 2019, but have led to no community solar developments here in New Orleans. We finally have some projects in the queue after a couple of years of advocacy, but we're still in the midst of a pitched battle with Entergy over an issue around consolidated billing for community solar to make it really accessible for people. So the fight goes on a number of fronts to provide, energy efficiency and distributed energy resources to people, because we found, that's what creates true resilience for people here in New Orleans. When we have these kind of climate disasters, and just the sort of more frequent day-to-day effects of climate change that we're experiencing, including extreme cold. We had a blizzard come through New Orleans this year, which
Wow.
was the first in over 100 years, I think. Yeah, we're feeling, more extreme heat, more extreme cold. We have, more frequent tornadoes now. So we're feeling the effects full bore. And, our city leadership, unfortunately, has not acted with the kind of urgency that we would like to see, which is why, our continuing advocacy is so important.
By city leadership, are you referring to the city council and the mayor as well?
Yeah, I would say for both parts. The mayor's office has less, they don't have regulatory authority, for instance, over the utilities. But our mayor has, also made some decisions that were questionable. For instance, buying a bunch of vehicles for the city fleet in violation of an ordinance requiring, low emissions vehicles, among other things. But I would say primarily, our quarrel, our beef is with the city council, because, it does have this sort of unique regulatory authority. The only other city council in the United States that has regulatory authority over investor-owned utilities is the City Council of Washington, D.C. And so, we urge them all the time to, use that authority for the benefit of ratepayers. Unfortunately, sometimes they go along with, the lead of the Public Service Commission, as in the case of this gas sale. But we have had some major wins as a result of that independent regulatory authority here locally. We've been able to get past, a renewable portfolio standard for Louisiana, or for New Orleans, I'm sorry, requiring, Entergy New Orleans to meet an escalating percentage of customer demand using renewable energy. We've gotten the ethics ordinance passed that I mentioned before, some reliability standards, which were the first, in the southeastern region. So, it's a constant battle to keep the council, keep the fire under them, and maintain the urgency that the situation demands.
I bet that's difficult though, with all that, with all of Bernhard's cash stuffed in their ears. It's probably hard to get a message across to them.
It is, and even without, with the ethics ordinance we have in place now, banning contributions from Entergy to city council members, they still, like I said, wield an enormous amount of political influence just by virtue of their position as the sole Fortune 500 company in the city. It brings this level of prestige that, the city council doesn't want to be seen too much in opposition to.
Right? It's probably kind of like a Disneyland in Anaheim kind of a situation. Like, what are you going to do? It's difficult. That is very difficult. But I'm wondering, since the transition is somewhat on the horizon still for you, and you haven't had a chance to see some of the tangible benefits or lack thereof of this acquisition, we'll have to stay in touch and talk to you again, maybe at the end of the summer or in the fall, and see how things are going with BCP taking things over there. I'm wondering if you have, because we have a few more minutes left here, wondering if you have a warning for New Mexico or any tips for new energy economy as we attempt to oppose this acquisition.
Yeah, I would just say that the level of secrecy that Bernhard, got away with, quite frankly, in the proceeding here in New Orleans is alarming. In addition to this, creating new confidentiality designations whole cloth of its own, volition. We know that as a private equity firm, Bernhard will not have the same reporting requirements, for instance, to the Securities and Exchange Commission that an investor-owned utility like Entergy has. They also don't have reporting requirements to shareholders, which Entergy has. And that has been a way that we've learned a lot about Entergy's, plans, for the future, is through their shareholder presentations. But we won't even have that much disclosure with this private equity firm in control. And the fact that they, were insisting on this unusual and, quite frankly, I would argue illegal level of secrecy around this proceeding does not portend good things for how they will behave as a regulated utility. If this is truly in the public interest, then it seems like they would be perfectly willing to be as transparent as possible to make sure people, understand well these, supposed benefits. But that isn't what we experienced here.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not a typical capitalist enterprise. They're not buying a hot dog stand. They're buying something that is sometimes, I know in the case of New Mexico, when it gets really cold in rural areas, it's a life or death service that's provided. And if there are cuts, increases in rates, liability issues, safety issues, this can lead to loss of life. And So, like I said, it's not a hot dog stand where you just get to slap on your extra couple of cents and pat yourself on the back for making some money. There needs to be a demonstrable benefit to the public that seems, um, again, seems to be missing from BCP's approach. Um, so we'll definitely keep that in mind. The transparency issue is huge. They're already overclassifying documents when it comes to their acquisition here. Um, and so that's definitely something to look out for. Let's see.
Yeah, well, I would definitely love to talk again once they begin, operation and service as a utility. They have, agreed as a condition of the sale to a 15-month rate freeze, so they will be inheriting, Entergy's current rates and will not be filing a rate case until at least 15 months. But we know, again, based on their capital expansion plans, that once that rate case comes, it's likely to be a doozy, and rates will likely increase significantly. And again, this is going to be for a shrinking pool of very vulnerable captive ratepayers. So once that 15 months is up, anything goes.
Wow. So yeah, I guess it's up to folks like you to stick up for those low-income captive ratepayers, and also to enforce the general urgency behind climate transition and resilience, as you said. You've said the word resilience a few times. I think that's central to this issue. Making resilient, self-reliant communities that can make their own decisions about their energy. I want to thank you for your time today. Sorry for the late start, and I would love to talk to you again after some time has passed and check back in and see how things are going in NOLA.
That would be great. Thanks for inviting me on, and thank you for leading the fight out there in New Mexico.
Yeah. Again, this is Jesse George, the New Orleans Policy Director at the Alliance for Affordable Energy. And thank you one more time, Jesse, for your time. And we'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.